In this lecture, we are going to start a new module, module number 6, evolutionary tree reconstruction. And to start this module, in this lecture I am going to introduce what are phylogeny trees and in general overview of what are the properties of these trees, why are they useful and so on. So, let us get started. So, we have finished 5 modules of this course and today we are starting the 6th module, evolutionary tree reconstruction. Let me start with the basics of phylogenetics. So, what is a phylogeny tree? A phylogeny tree illustrates the evolutionary relationship between different species or organisms or genes from a common ancestor. A tree is a natural data structure that gives you a very nice graphical view to understand how these objects have evolved over time. And this phylogeny tree is a fundamental construction that is commonly used in multiple subfields of biology. I will discuss some examples to help you appreciate why these trees are important. So, let us consider various applications for where you may want to reconstruct the evolutionary relationship of different objects. The first application could be reconstructing the lineage of various species. So, for example, let us say you have different species, humans, mouse, rats, chimpanzees and so on, and you want to understand how they might have evolved or what their evolutionary history looked like. A related application is, suppose you have uncovered a new species and you want to classify, for example, what family it belongs to, right. So, one way is to maybe look at it based on its morphological features. Maybe the new species has 2 legs, it has ability to fly and so on. One can maybe infer based on just the visual inspection, but to do an exact inference one needs to build these phylogenetic trees and give a proper classification to a newly discovered species. One can also try to infer how different functions evolved. For example, if you look at the ability to fly, how did organisms got this function of flying? Like, was there a common ancestor which had the ability to fly and did that function got inherited by, let us say, birds, insects or so on, or was this trait independently, did it evolve independently in different species? Similarly, the second application would be the evolution of virus strains. So, in infectious disease and epidemiology, you may want to track the evolution of viral strains. So, for example, HIV is a fast rapidly evolving virus and there we may want to see how this virus is evolving and that guides the vaccine development for that virus. Similarly, in cancer research we may want to reconstruct the phylogeny of tumor cells, which may help us understand how cancer cells are evolving. And so by default phylogenetic trees give you a view of the past, that is, from the current view how did the evolution happen in the past, but at the same time phylogenetic tree can also be useful to draw insights on what future evolutionary changes may look like, right. So, given these vast applications, phylogenetics is a fundamental field of computational biology and we will look at these concepts involved in this space in more details. Just a historical note. So, until 1950s the phylogenetic relationships were mainly inferred using expert opinions. So, for example, these used to be very subjective based on the characteristics observed by eyes. but since then objective methods and algorithms have been used in practice. So, for example, in the past biologists would mainly rely on morphological features such as number of legs, lengths of legs and so on. But now the modern methods use molecular features, for example gene sequence, protein sequence or RNA sequence and so on, because these sequences give a more detailed view and exact view of the traits that the organism has. One can also use a combination of both. So, we will talk about this. Maybe you can also use a combination of morphological features as well as molecular features. So, let me give you a few examples which will convince you why tree reconstruction algorithms are very important. So, the first example comes from the giant panda case, and in this case it turned out that for roughly 100 years it was not known whether the giant panda species belonged to the bear family or the raccoon family. So, in this case, so bear and raccoons are two different families which have different features, and for giant panda they look like bears, but they carry features which are unusual for bears and they are typically found in raccoons. For example, giant pandas do not hibernate, right. So, whereas bear family has a common feature of hibernation. So, this question, although it remained open for 100 years, it was finally resolved in 1985 by using DNA sequencing and tree reconstruction algorithms. So, using DNA sequencing, scientists inferred what the phylogenetic tree looks like, and using the tree it was found that the giant panda species is more closely related to the bear family compared to the raccoon family. So, this objective method of using rigorous algorithms and following DNA sequencing and molecular data sort of resolved this question which was left open for many years. And if you go to the Wikipedia page now and just open the Wikipedia page of giant panda, the very first line of the article tells you that the giant panda belongs to the bear species endemic to China. So, this basically it shows you that the very fundamental characteristic of giant panda, that is which family it belongs to, was resolved using tree reconstruction algorithms. Let me move on to a second example which again highlights a very important scientific discovery that again came from the phylogenetic reconstruction algorithms. So, again around the same time when this panda riddle was resolved, in the same time during 1980s, the evolutionary tree reconstruction of human DNA sequences led to the out of Africa hypothesis, which claims that all living humans are genetically descended from a single African mother who lived less than 200,000 years ago. So, observe that this is a very recent phenomena. So, using phylogenetic reconstruction, it was this hypothesis was put forward that the modern humans recently came and emerged from the African continent. So, the modern humans like the ancestors lived in Africa and they migrated to the rest of the world from African continent. Now, this is a widely believed hypothesis today, and how tree reconstruction algorithms helped is following. So, this tree was reconstructed using DNA sequences in particular here mitochondrial DNA sequences were used, and these sequences were taken from people of different races and nationalities. And when the algorithms were used and the tree was reconstructed, it was found that the African genomes form a outgroup in this tree, that is they form a completely different clade as compared to rest of the humans from other races and nations. So, because of this topology where you have a complete clade forming from African individuals, one can infer from this topology that a population of Africans forms the trunk of the tree, and the first branch of the tree emerges from African population. The second branch of this tree represents a subgroup of the people who left Africa and then later spread to the rest of the world. Right. So, again you can see here Chinese populations, Australian populations, Caucasian, South Asian populations and so on. So, using tree reconstruction algorithms, this hypothesis, evidence for this hypothesis was put forward, and this forms a major landmark discovery as far as the evolution of humans is concerned. Another more recent example is from the COVID pandemic, where many of you may have already seen such pictures where you would see different SARS-CoV-2 virus mutations, and people used phylogenetic trees methods to see how different variants are evolving. So, for example, we had delta variants, beta variants, omicron variants, gamma variants and so on, and these tree reconstruction algorithms were showing how these variants are evolving over time. And again, this was very important for all the vaccine development efforts. In fact, these trees can also give insights to what changes to the viral genome may happen in future as well. So, for example, some virus genomes may be, some viral strains may be fast evolving, whereas some viral strains may be slow evolving, and this can be revealed from the phylogenetic tree as well. So, given these important examples, I hope you are convinced that these tree reconstruction algorithms are very important, and from now on I will start discussing the mathematical properties of these trees. We will defer the discussion of algorithms to the next lecture. For now, I only want to cover the basics of these tree and how they look like. So, the first basic question is, what kind of data would you use for tree reconstruction? Well, typically there are two kinds of data that people use. So, in one case you may have numerical data, that is you may have pairwise evolutionary distances between objects. For example, you may be given that distance between human and mouse is 500, whereas distance between human and chimp is 100. Right. This, for example, this numerical data may come from the mutations observed in these genomes. So, for example, maybe this quantity is proportional to the number of mutations between them. The other kind of data is discrete characters, for example, where each character has a finite alphabet. This includes morphological features, for example, the number of legs can be either 1, 2 or 4, or you can have molecular data as well, for example, aligned DNA sequences where each character will be either A, C, G or T. Similarly, you can have RNA sequences or protein sequences. In these cases, each character will be a discrete character. That is, each feature will be a discrete character. Okay. So, you can build trees either using numerical data or using discrete characters, and we will discuss algorithms on how to use this data for tree reconstruction. There are two types of phylogenetic trees. One is rooted and second is unrooted tree. As the name suggests, in a rooted tree you have a root. That is, let us say you have 5 present day species. So, suppose you have present day species A, B, C, D and E. The internal nodes of this tree represent the ancestors. So, for example, this internal node represents the most recent common ancestor of A and B. Similarly, the root node represents most recent common ancestor of all 5 species, that is A, B, C, D and E. So, as you go from leaf towards root, you are moving from present to past. That is, you are looking at the present day species and you are moving towards past. Similarly, I can say that a path from root to a leaf node gives you an evolutionary path of how that species evolved over time. So, leaves correspond to existing species, internal nodes correspond to the ancestral species. Also, root node has degree 2, that is, the root node has 2 descendants, and the internal nodes have degree 3. So, every internal node will have 1 parent and 2 descendants. Okay. So, these are the properties of these trees. Now, in an unrooted tree, again as the name suggests, we do not have a root, and the key difference here is that the unrooted tree illustrates only the relatedness of the leaf nodes, and it does not require the ancestral root to be known or inferred. So, an example is shown on the left, where you see an unrooted tree of 6 leaf nodes, and observe that here we are not claiming any internal node to be a root. That is, we are not making any inference on what is the most recent common ancestor of all these 6 species, right. So, it is only illustrating the relatedness of the leaf nodes, that is how they are evolutionarily related to each other. So, for example, you can infer that A and B are closely related compared to A and C. Okay. In a phylogenetic tree, we also have edge weights. So, a weight of an edge, let us say a weight of an edge u v. In this case, it is 14 for this particular example. A weight of an edge may reflect the number of mutations between u and v, or it may be used to convey a time estimate for the evolution of species u into v, or vice versa, right. So, you can, so different methods depending on the method being used, edge can indicate the number of mutations between u and v, or a time estimate for the evolution of species u into v. And based on these edge weights, we can now use the length of a path. So, for example, if I consider 2 nodes 1 and 5, then the length of the entire path from 1 to 5 is the sum of the weights of edges in that path. So, for example, that would tell you if each edge weight denotes the number of mutations, then the length of the path from 1 to 5 will tell you the number of mutations between 1 and 5. Similarly, if this is a time estimate So, if each edge indicates a time estimate, then the length of the path would indicate the time estimate for the evolution of species 1 to 5. So, in this case you would add up 12, 13, 14, 17 and 12. Right. So, each edge has a weight, and this is again, so this therefore, you can think of a phylogenetic tree as a weighted binary tree. Okay. So, one key challenge in phylogenetic tree reconstruction is a large space of trees. So, for example, the number of possible trees grows very fast if you keep on increasing the number of leaf nodes. So, one can ask the following question, like for a given number of leaf nodes, how many distinct unrooted trees you can draw? Similarly, for a given number of leaf nodes, how many distinct rooted trees you can draw? And if we do this analysis, which I will show you next, we will find that the space of phylogenetic trees is very big, and the number of trees grows exponentially with the number of leaf nodes, which is what makes the tree reconstruction problem challenging to solve. So, let us consider the first question, that is, for a given number of leaf nodes, how many distinct unrooted trees can you draw? So, this requires a simple mathematical analysis. Assume the following notations, that is, let us say E denotes the number of edges, I denotes the number of internal nodes, and L denotes the number of leaf nodes. In that case, in a tree, observe that the number of edges is number of nodes minus 1. Now, this is a fundamental property of a tree. So, you can easily prove by induction, that is, number of edges is equal to number of nodes minus 1, and this property is easily proven using induction. Now, the second claim I am making is that in an unrooted tree, 2 times number of edges equals to 3 times number of internal nodes plus the number of leaf nodes. This is also easy to see. Why? Because basically what I am doing is I am adding up the degrees on the right hand side. So, each internal node is connected to 3 edges, that is, each internal node has a degree of 3, and each leaf node has a degree 1. So, if you just simply add up the degrees, right, 3i plus L, that is, you are adding the degrees, then you are counting each edge twice, right, because if you are adding the degree of this node, you will be counting this edge, and similarly if you are counting the degree of right hand side node, then you are also again counting this edge. So, therefore, we can write this as 2 times number of edges. Now, if you just simply use these two equations, we can get a quick relationship between the number of edges and the number of leaf nodes, right. So, once you so let us do that. So, I can write 2 times E as 3 times E minus L plus 1 and plus L, and if I solve this, what we get is 2 times L equals to E plus 3. So, in other words, I can write this as E equals to 2 L minus 3. Right. So, this basically gives you the relationship between the number of edges and the number of leaf nodes in an unrooted tree. Now, how does this help? Well, now we can analyze the number of possible unrooted trees. So, let me ask you a simple question. How many unrooted trees do we have if you have 3 leaf nodes? So, let us say I write here number of leaf nodes and then number of edges, and then how many trees do you have? So, let us say you have 3 leaf nodes, then of course you have 3 edges, right. So, because the tree of 3 leaf nodes will look like this, and observe that there is only one tree possible when you have 3 leaf nodes, that is a star like or a triangle like, or that is a tree which you have one internal node and 3 leaf nodes. So, that is a single tree that is possible in that way. Now, if you go and analyze the number of trees which have 4 leaf nodes, observe that to add the 4th edge you have 4 choices, right. So, let me use a different color now. So, either you can add a 4th leaf node here, right, or you can add a 4th leaf node here, or you can add a 4th leaf node here. In that case, the number of edges will be 5 now, because you have added, when you add a new leaf node you have added 2 edges, and the total number of trees is 1 times 3, because you have 3 choices to make. Similarly, if you go to 5 leaf nodes, you will find that you have 7 edges, and this time you will have 1 times 3, that is you have already 3 trees now, 3 possible trees to choose from, and in each tree you will have 5 more choices to add an additional leaf node. And if we continue this to n, we just established that if you have n leaf nodes, then you have 2n minus 3 edges, and this time you will have 1 times 3 times 5 up to, so on, you can keep on multiplying, and you will have 2n minus 5. So, you have this is equivalent to 2n minus 5 double factorial. So, you can easily see that the number of trees grows exponentially with the number of leaf nodes. We can do the same analysis for rooted trees as well. So, this time you have the same property, right. So, we have the same notation. Now, the number of internal nodes that also includes root node, and again you have the same notation. The same property holds, that is the number of edges equals to number of nodes minus 1, and finally in a rooted tree, in a rooted binary tree, the number of edges is equal to 2 times the internal node, because each internal node has 2 descendants. Starting from the root, a root will have 2 descendants, and then each internal node will have 2 descendants. So, in other words, for each internal node you are adding 2 edges. Now, this time if you work this out, what you will achieve is, in this case you will get a relationship. So, if you can resolve these equations, so the relationship will look like this, that is the number of edges is equal to 2 times the number of leaf nodes minus 2. we can repeat the same analysis that we did last time. So for counting the total number of rooted trees, what we can do is we can consider the total number of all possible unrooted trees. So consider all possible unrooted tree. So you pick any unrooted tree, pick any unrooted tree out of all the possibilities having n leaf nodes. So let us say you have this unrooted tree where you have 3 leaf nodes. Then what we can do is we can add the root into this tree by adding one more node on any edge. So for example, I can pick this edge and I can say that this is my root, and I can connect these 2 nodes as the descendants of the root node, right. So in other words, I can pick any edge of the unrooted tree and I can put the root there. As a result, the total number of rooted trees now becomes 2n minus 5 double factorial, which was the total number of unrooted trees, times the total number of edges, which we know is 2n minus 3 in a unrooted tree. So if you multiply this, now this is 2n minus 3 double factorial. So this is how many rooted trees you can build out of n leaf nodes. So if you just see now, so if we apply this formula and if you just calculate how fast the number of possible trees grow, you can easily see that this number is quickly growing. And this is, so through these numbers I hope you appreciate now that we cannot consider an algorithm which enumerates all possible trees. So for example, if a naive algorithm enumerates all possible trees and then decides which one of them fits best with the data, that is not possible, because there are exponentially number of trees in terms of the leaf nodes. So therefore we will use various algorithms to build these trees. So there are 3 common types of methods. The first one is distance based, where you are given pairwise distances between all taxa and you have to find a tree that fits those distances as best as possible. The second type is maximum parsimony, where, as the name suggests, you are looking for a tree which involves minimum number of evolutionary steps to explain the given data. That is, you are looking for a simplest possible tree that explains the given data. And in the third, which is maximum likelihood, there you have a probabilistic model of evolution and we look for the tree which maximizes the likelihood of explaining that given data. So which tree has the maximum likelihood given the data we have. So we will go into the details of the first 2 methods in our course, that is distance based methods and the maximum parsimony methods. So in the next lecture we will look at the distance based tree reconstruction algorithms and we will see how we can solve the challenging problem of tree reconstruction for phylogenetic inference. Thank you.